Okay, I'm going to think about beginning, and now I'm going to begin. Let's say a prayer. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, amen. Grant us grace, O merciful God, to desire ardently all that is pleasing to Thee, to examine it prudently, to acknowledge it truthfully, and to accomplish it perfectly for the praise and glory of Thy name, who live and reign forever and ever. Amen. Our Lady, Seat of Wisdom. St. Thomas Aquinas. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. I love to pray through the intercession of saints at the end of an opening prayer, because then you get to see a bunch of people go like this. I would never do that. That'd be cruel. Okay, I just did it. So my name is Father Gregory Pine. I am a Dominican friar of the province of St. Joseph, which is this region here. And I live at the Dominican House of Studies, which is in Washington, D.C. You can call it the Dominican House of Buddies, if you like. That makes it less intimidating, I suppose. I work for the Thomistic Institute, which is a research institute of our faculty, which actually has a presence here at George Mason University. Cheers. And what else? I think it's like basically all. Oh, I sometimes contribute to podcasts. One is called Snuggling with Aquinas. No, just kidding. It's called Pints with Aquinas, and the other is called Godsplaining. That's a joke, but that's serious too. So yeah, those are podcasts. And tonight I'm going to talk about whether or not men and women can be friends, because I thought I'd pick an uncontroversial theme. Okay, I'll say something serious eventually. All right, so what we're going to talk about is first friendship, and then men and women, and then just talk about whether or not men and women can be friends. So we'll establish some first principles, get some common ground, get people nodding their heads and agreeing, and then we'll just drop bombs at the end. Okay. So spoilers, I think it's possible. Okay? I think it's possible. I just think it's difficult. All right, so here we go. Friendship. What is friendship? Friendship is mutual benevolence with a shared life. That's a nice little compact definition if you're looking to memorize one. Mutual benevolence with a shared life. Okay, so 3 dimensions. Benevolence. Benevolence means to will the good to another. Bene, good, you recognize that. Volere, volitional, you recognize that too. So to will the good to another. It's got to be mutual. That is to say, it has to be reciprocated. So that's, intuitive. You can't just really, really desire somebody's good and have them ignore you, and you call that a friendship. That's creepy. Okay. You also have to have a shared life, right? So it may be the case that I know everything there is to know about Joel Embiid. I may have visited his hometown in Cameroon. I may have studied his statistics exhaustively. I may have plastered my walls with posters of his likeness. But unless I have some shared life with him, then we are not friends. So if I were to accost him at the end of a 76ers basketball game and say, "My friend, at long last," he'd be like, "Step away." Also, Hulu has live sports. So it has to be benevolent, it has to be mutual, and there has to be a shared life. So I will the good of the beloved, that is reciprocated, and then we have something together. So a brief word more about these things. Why would I will the good of another person? Why would I will the good of another person? Well, because it's good to do so. Okay, Father Gregory, that's wildly unhelpful. Break that out for me. Okay, why would I will the good of another person? Because we find ourselves born into a network of relationships. So you may have read John Locke or Thomas Hobbes and gotten the sense that before we entered into society, we were all individuals with our rights, but then we kind of compromised on some of those rights and so formed a social contract. Okay, that's crazy. You are always and everywhere born into relationships, right? So you are born as a son or daughter of parents. You are born oftentimes as a brother or sister of siblings. You are born into a particular town, state, nation. You don't choose your language. You often don't choose your faith. So there's a lot of our life that we just inherit. And part of the thing that we inherit is other people, okay? G.K. Chesterton has this really cool essay called On the Institution of the Family. It's in a book called Heretics, a lot of which I don't understand. And he says the thing that's cool about family is that you don't choose it, right? A stork just drops you down a random chimney, and you come to discover that you're living in the immediate company of your dread enemies. Okay? But that's what life is about, learning how to make the best of it. So Why would we will the good of another human being? Because we can't get away from other human beings, okay? And we can either fight them endlessly or learn how to cooperate with them healthily, all right? In all love, we observe a kind of twofold movement, all right? We can call it like the love of the good and then the love of the person. So when I'm willing the good to another, I consider a good, okay? So like maybe it's the good of wine. And I will that good to myself as delightful, as intoxicating, as begetting mirth, right? As lowering inhibition, whatever. But I also will it to others for the general, like, kind of enjoyment of their company. You often find, okay, women often have hobbies. You know, like you're talking to women, they're like, I was working on my calligraphy the other day as I was preparing to go yachting, and you're like, you're exhausting. Whereas most dudes don't have hobbies, okay? They're like, I was drinking and smoking the other day. And then I did nothing else. So oftentimes men will the good of each other's company, but you can't be like, hey, bro, let's talk to each other for an hour and a half. If you say that to a guy, be like, yeah, I'm gonna go now, all right? Then you're like, hey, let's have a cigar and like kick back a few beers. He's like, let's do that. And then you find yourselves chatting. Okay, so why am I talking about this? Well, because there's a good that you will, and then there's a person to whom you will it, okay? I think a lot of people have in their minds that with friendship, it has to be for the other. It has to be self-sacrificial. You can't take any account of yourself. I think that's a bad way to understand it. We shouldn't pose like a dichotomy. Dichotomy is a big word meaning like two things at loggerheads, you know, two things that can't be reconciled. So there's no dichotomy between like egoism and altruism in relationships. It's not like either I'm taking care of myself or I'm taking care of other people. What happens in a relationship is that you regard the good and that you will it to be enjoyed together. So in friendship, what you're actually willing is the good of a shared life. All right, that doesn't sound like a revolutionary claim, but let's break it down. All right, so let's say that you're applying for graduate school. Let's say that you're applying for graduate school in biomedical engineering, okay? You got into Rutgers, you got into UVA, and then you got into University of Pennsylvania. And let's say that your friend is applying to go on to graduate school in English, all right? And she got into Columbia and UPenn, and she got into Rutgers, okay? Now, the best program is at UVA, right? But like the other two ones, you could potentially go to school with your friend. Would you ever make a decision to go to a place because of the people with whom you'd be there? I think a lot of people like go to the best school, get the best financial package, you know, be super aggressive and competitive. But in a friendship, you're actually taking account of the other person as a good for you and taking account of yourself as a good for them and willing a shared life. So like when you graduate, it's good to make decisions based on the people with whom you live, right? Because right here you have a great Christian community, and you can be genuinely, dynamically Catholic in each other's company without feeling in the least bit ashamed or embarrassed. But that's not the case outside these walls and in many places in the United States, okay? So what we're talking about with friendship is we're talking about willing the good of the other, having that reciprocated, and that being in the context of a shared life. There's a kind of logic in friendship at work, I would say a logic of total sharing. You want to share everything with your friend. And when you don't, you experience it as a kind of distance. You experience it as a kind of suffering. So like chaste lovers, for instance, talk about self-donation. You know, they speak of giving themselves whole and entire to the beloved. Unchaste lovers will often talk about like devouring each other. You know, there's a kind of like movement in love that wants to bleed into the other and have the other bleed into you. And so when you get yourself involved in a friendship, there's this dynamism. You want to share the whole thing. You want to abolish the distance that keeps you from being that other's and the other being yours. You want possession. So, again, what we're talking about is willing the good of the other, having reciprocated and having a shared life, okay? Oftentimes that shared life is based upon a shared activity. So that could be like, I don't know, you're mutually interested in loving the Lord, okay? You're in a discipleship relationship with your focused missionary. You guys like, you know, like you pack up your Toyota Corolla, you schlep out to Shenandoah National Park, you rent a Potomac Appalachian Trail Club cabin and spend 3 days, you know, just like hiking sweet things proposed to you by hikingupward.com. Okay, so like, your like relationship is based on common activity. If your focused missionary was like, let's have a discipleship relationship, you'd be like, okay. And then they're like, okay. You're like, what are we doing, you know? C.S. Lewis observes that in order to have friends, you have to want something more than friends. Okay, so if someone were to come up to you and they were like, I've never had a friend before, Would you be my friend? You'd be like, let's talk about common interests, and also I'm going to back away while you're thinking about it. You know? All right, so it's based on a shared activity. Okay, so this is our basic sketch of friendship. Mutual benevolence with a shared life. Now let's talk about men and women, okay? So we're getting to the question of whether or not men and women can be friends. So we've introduced the theme of friendship. We have it kind of operative in the back of our mind. And like, at first it sounds like a silly question because are not men and women both human beings? Actually, Dorothy Sayers, who's this really brilliant intellectual, she has an awesome essay that I would recommend to you. It's short. It's like 15 pages long. It's called Are Women Human? It's sweet. It's sweet. She's a charmer. She wrote detective fiction. If you guys have ever gotten to like Agatha Christie, I have. Yeah, she wrote a lot of detective stories that are better, in my opinion, humble opinion, better than Agatha Christie's. Her male protagonist is a dude named Lord Peter Wimsey, who's like, whatever, who cares? Okay. But she also translated Dante's Divine Comedy. Penguin Classics ran her edition for like 20 years. She's a smart lady. Okay, so cool essay. I recommend it. So men and women, we're asking if they can be friends. It seems like a silly question because are not they both human? Yes, okay, but men and women give expression to humanity in different ways. So let's talk about the commonality. Let's talk about the difference. Let's raise some questions, and then let's do questions. I'll stop talking in like 12 minutes, and then we'll have like 25 minutes for questions. Does that sound cool? Okay. I didn't listen for your answer. Okay, so men and women, what do they have in common? Well, they both are human beings, right? So they have a common human nature. Aristotle defines human nature as that of a rational animal. We can also say that both men and women are made to the image of God. St. Thomas has this awesome article in the Summa Theologiae where he asks, why was it that Eve was made of Adam's rib? And he says, if she were to have been made from his feet, then he would have ruled over her. If she were to have been made from his head, then she would have ruled over him. But she is taken from his side to represent her equality. So both are made to the image of God. What does that mean? Okay, in the most basic sense, it means we have minds with which to know and we have hearts with which to love. To be made to the image of God sets us apart from the beasts because we have a peculiar intellectual capacity for knowing and loving. All right. Well, beyond just having the capacity, though, we can actually know and love God. So our being open to these things is oriented towards God. And what is more, we can know God with His own knowledge, and we can love God with His own love. You're like, all right, that's like a silly, purposefully paradoxical claim. It's something that Chesterton would write and then not explain. Come on, Chief. All right, so what do I mean by that? Well, God knows Himself perfectly because God is His knowledge of Himself. So there is no division in God, no shadow of division in God. He is His existence. He is His intellect. He is His act of intellection. He is the object of His intellection. God is thought thinking itself, says Aristotle. And we can actually have a share in that. So whereas now, we are accustomed to think thoughts in kind of plodding fashion, albeit limited and painstaking. And then like we come to the realization like, oh my gosh, like 9 months ago I was being wildly selfish. It's like, no kidding you were. Right? And it just took you time to figure it out. Okay, I'll stop narrating my own autobiography. So we can actually know God with His own knowledge of Himself because it is the only sufficient principle of the knowledge of God. We cannot know Him but for His revealing. And we can love Him with His own love. This is what we mean by charity. All right? Charity is not just patronizing somebody, condescending to them, giving them money, and then running away because they're dirty. Charity is loving them with God's own love, operative in your life, which exceeds the capacity of your own limited heart. That's awesome and devastating. It's a high calling. Okay. Now, we are all called to friendship because friendship is an integral part of human flourishing. We are meant to enjoy a good life. We are meant to enjoy the type of life for which we need no further justification. So if somebody were to ask you, like, why do you want to be virtuous? You'd be like, weird question, bro. It's like virtue is just part of the good life. There is no asking beyond virtue. It's like, why do you want God? It's like, because I am one big open wound of God desire. And apart from that, my life is a shambles, a dumpster fire, okay? So there are certain things in which the good life simply consists. God, contemplation, worship, virtue, wisdom, play, leisure, friendship. Okay? Part of what it means to be a human being is to be in relation to others in such a way that your flourishing is bound up. Because we go to God together. Because like I said, we are born into relationships. They are not something which we choose. But we can perfect them. We can perfect them. Now, let's talk about difference, and then let's talk about some practicals. Difference. There is a sexual difference between men and women. We know this. We don't need to be told this. There is one biological feature of human life that you cannot do alone, and that is procreation. Now, that has implications for every dimension of human life. You may have read some of the theology of the body. You may not have. Doesn't matter too terribly much. Okay. So, I'm going to read you a quotation from Edith Stein. It doesn't make any sense to me. It won't make any sense to you, but I think it's cool. I am convinced, she writes, that the species humanity embraces the double species man and woman, that the essence of the complete human being is characterized by this duality, and that the entire structure of the essence demonstrates the specific character. There is a difference not only in body structure and in particularly physiological functions, but also in the entire corporeal life. The relationship of soul to body is different in man and woman. The relationship of soul to body differs in their psychic life, as well as that of the spiritual faculties to each other. The feminine species expresses a unity and a wholeness of the total psychosomatic personality and a harmonious development of faculties. The masculine species strives to enhance individual abilities in order that they may attain their highest achievements. The species humanity, as well as the species femininity, is revealed differently in different individuals. Okay, I'm not even going to read it again because we don't need to. What is the point? Your body makes a difference. Okay, your body makes a difference. This is contrary to queer theory. This is contrary to gender theory. Your body makes a difference. So, depending on who you follow philosophically, not terribly important. We're not going to get into controversial claims. But what you are bodily has a kind of resonance in what you are spiritually. So as a result of which, you act differently, you feel differently, you think differently, and you commune differently. What do we mean by this? Okay, well, when Edith Stein breaks this out and analyzes it, she says that it's always true of a man that he is somehow son, husband, and father. It's always true of a woman that she is somehow daughter, bride, and mother. So what you are, who you are, somehow speaks to that distinct identity as gendered. Okay? Now, let's talk about the peculiar excellence of each in dialogue with the other. I don't want to descend into crass gender stereotypes because on the one hand they're kind of helpful, like stereotypes are stereotypes, but on the other hand they're not too terribly helpful because I think a lot of times when we hear it we feel like our individuality has been run roughshod over by a characterization to which we never consented. So, I'm just going to say some things, we're going to deal with it, and then we're going to move on. So think about in relation to a man, think about a woman in relation to a man and a man in relation to a woman. These are my kind of musings, all right, so this deal. I would say that a woman elicits from man a response. She sensitizes him to the subtleties of human life. She pacifies his untoward exuberance and tempers his violence. She encourages him to incorporate his brute body into a truly rational life. She helps him attend to details. She helps him care for the heart. Okay, these are some thoughts. They could be wrong in part. All right. Now think about man in regard to woman. Man serves as the opposite pole. His brutishness and intrepid spirit is a check on creeping domesticity and excess of control. I am not saying that woman is constitutionally incapable of venture without man, but there is something peculiar about the recklessness of a man which forces a woman beyond the limits of her comfort. What do I mean by this? Okay, you can picture General Patton in charge of the 1st Armored Division, literally outrunning his supply lines in pursuit of Berlin, willing to sacrifice man after man after man because he knows that the sooner he gets to the Nazi high command, the sooner this war ends. And on the one hand, it seems like he doesn't give a care in the world about the individual soldier. The most famous interaction that he had with an individual soldier, he slapped him with his gloves. But General Patton's exuberance, his brutishness, his masculinity, are at the service of a kind of common good that we can appreciate now in hindsight. I think if a woman were in charge of the 1st Armored Division, she would take more care of the soldiers, right? She would take more care of her soldiers. But I don't think that she would get to Berlin as quickly. All right? I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I'm just saying it's a different thing. Okay? You can think of Ulysses S. Grant, okay, where he in Virginia. So how did Ulysses S. Grant win the Civil War? With corpses. All right? That is a sad, sad thing, but that is testified to by military history. He won it with corpses. He was outgunned. I mean, not in the strict sense because he had more industry and he had more railroads. But there were far better generals on the side of the South. Far better tacticians, far better men, actually, if we're honest. Grant was a dissolute drunk. The only way in which he provided for his family was writing a memoir right before he died, and then they, subsisted off the royalties. But He won the war with bodies. Okay, that's what I'm talking about. Recklessness, that's what I'm talking about with brutishness. So, let's think now, our application section about man and woman in relation to each other in terms of friendship. So each of us has, by virtue of the fact that we are human beings, a natural kind of like inclination towards certain goods. We'll talk about this in terms of like the natural law. So on account of the fact that we are substances, I'm going to use some philosophical speak because why not? Okay. Wow, chilly. I'm feeling it. Sorry, that's so gross. I'm thinking of like John Mulaney's second stand-up where he talks about that point in your life as an adult where you start swallowing burps, you know, like, how did it come to this? Oh! I long for a time of eternal youth. So, on account of the fact that we are substances, we are inclined to the preservation of our existence. Okay, so we eat food and we drink drink. We are fortified by calories. On account of the fact that we are animals, we are inclined to procreation and education of children, which is to say, we are instinctually ordered to hand on life. Okay, side note, this is why your inclinations to food, drink, and sexual appetite are the most vehement, the most impassioned, the most strong, because they are in you instinctually to ensure the fact that you stick around and that your race sticks around. Okay? Because were those instincts not to operate in such vehement fashion, you just have like a bunch of dudes in their parents' basements at the age of 28 just like playing Halo, and mom would be like, hey, do you want to have a family and hand on life? And be like, we're good. Okay. So instead, you are impetuously inclined towards food, drink, and sexual intercourse. Okay. Now, when like this thing is operative in a human life, you're inclined to a member of the other species because you recognize in them the capacity for love and the capacity to, hand on life. This isn't to think about the other strictly or crassly in terms of the reproductive capacity, okay? So we're not reducing women to helpmates for baby making, nor are we reducing men to like progenitors, all right? But we are saying that there is an instinct that's operative, and that's always going to be present in relationships between men and women. So, from the perspective of a man, his apprehension of other people is like, okay, here is someone known, here is someone like to me, here is someone good. Okay, you can think about the way that he might, appreciate the friendship of another dude that he comes to meet at St. Robert Bellarmine is like, this guy, let's go, okay. All right? But with a woman, there is a distinct, there's a distinct revelation operative, okay? So he sees a kind of distinct excellence in the woman that is alluring, that is attractive, and that is somehow bound up with this instinctual fact. Yes. So, what I'm trying to say is that men and women are different, and that they're inclined towards each other for this reason. And I'm also saying, based on the Edith Stein quote, that this has a kind of spiritual resonance. So it's not just a bodily thing, it's also a spiritual thing. I was once chatting with somebody about this. Okay, so I think men talk about tasks and women talk about relationships. Crass gender stereotype. Deal with it. Okay. So oftentimes I think when women talk to men, they feel that they are boring the man, because oftentimes a woman is more so content to talk about things that provide fodder for connection, whereas men are often thinking about a conversation in terms of goal-orientedness. So it's like, all right, let's do this conversation, and then let's do this next conversation. And when a woman hears that or observes that in a conversation, she's like, would that we could just be together, all right? So I've often had the experience where I've ended a conversation with a woman, and then she subsequently revealed to me the fact that by so doing, I conveyed to her that I was waiting for an opportunity in the conversation to end the conversation. And that subsequently makes her, somewhat insecure in that at all points in said conversation, I am looking for an out. Okay, this is just different modes of communication, but you can see how they're, biological dimension with spiritual resonance. All right. So friendship between man and woman. I would say friendship makes life beautiful. Friendship makes life possible. Okay? So if we were to cut off the prospect of friendship with half of the human race, that makes me a little bit nervous, because I think we'd be cutting ourselves off from a beauty which makes life good. Okay? There's this cool scene in G.K. Chesterton's book, The Man Who Was Thursday. I don't understand it, but that doesn't matter. There's this guy, and he thinks he's surrounded by enemies, but he comes to discover that one of those enemies is actually a friend. And at that moment he says this. He says, throughout the whole ordeal, his root fear had been isolation. I concede to the mathematicians that 4 is twice 2, but 2 is not twice 1. 2 is 2,000 times 1. The difference between being alone and having a friend is like the difference between night and day. It's like the difference between crippling depression and like soul-withering anxiety and being able to navigate life with like a modicum of love, right? So, friendship is good. And I think that God intends that we have friendships with persons of the other sex. Mm-hmm. Okay, so from my own personal experience, friendship with women has like forced me to grow and change in a variety of ways. To mature, to think beyond my own immediate needs, to actually empathize, to be solicitous, to be generous, to be gentle, to be courteous, to be gracious, to be humble. All right, so all of these things. Now, let's focus on why sometimes it's difficult to be friends between men and women. I'm going to give you a case study. Okay, this is based on my own life. I'm sharing right now. This is me being vulnerable. At the end of this revelation, I want to feel seen, known, heard, loved. All right, so I celebrate Mass every day. Okay, sometimes I celebrate Mass for religious sisters. And there are a couple of congregations of religious sisters with whom I've made like some friends, and they're delightful, they're charming, they're wonderful, they're great to chat with. But I have this experience sometimes. So like Mass ends, I go to the sacristy, I divest, and then the question is like, what do you do? Because I'd like to chat, but they've got like their rules, like they got their silence thing going on. They've got to scurry off to school, and they're probably not encouraged to just chat with everyone, because if it's a women's religious congregation of like 350 and all of them chat with Father, then Father like dies of exposure, right? So they're all trying to be like, okay, all right. And me on the other hand, I don't want to be like predatory, like there's Father like lurking in the sacristy. Like I got some popsicles. It's like weird. And I imagine too, like these women, they don't want to be like, rushing up to chat with Father, because there's, a bunch of women in their congregation. You don't want to be the one who's like flouncing over and like tittering, So there's like this kind of mutual, I don't know exactly what you would call it, but like a reticence. Right, but I don't think that it would be good that both parties just learn to live without the other. Like I become the type of priest who's like, I finished Mass, time to pack up and go home to my boring tasks. Because I think it's like good to recognize like I enjoy their company, I'd like to chat with them. If I can find an opportunity, wonderful. If not, I'll get over it, right? And I think for them too, it's probably, you don't want to be the first one in line. You're like, oh, Father, great homily, even though it wasn't, right? Because then you get the reputation among your sisters, like, oh, she always chats with Father. If one of your sisters is like 65 and from Rockville Center, New York. She's always chatting with Father. Okay? So I think that we need to recognize the fact of this dynamic, right? We need to recognize the fact of this dynamic, be sensitive to it, but also be genuinely spontaneous interactions with members of the opposite sex, so that it doesn't like, I don't learn to live without women, right? And just get to a certain point where I've got like wild amounts of ear and nose hair, I'm just wearing sweatpants, I'm like tucking my undershirt in, got my clicker, got my beer koozie, I don't need women, It's like, no! That's like half of humanity. All right. So, I think that it is possible. It entails this kind of sensitivity, right? It entails a kind of maturity. So now I'm just going to talk about practicals, okay? And then we'll have time for questions. So, acknowledge and incorporate. So acknowledge the fact of difference, right? Acknowledge the fact of difference, and then kind of incorporate it in your interaction with members of the opposite sex, okay? I'm going to give you this tagline: don't freeze or fawn, just live. All right, so I think women have different ways of cultivating interest in men. I don't think men notice anything until such time as they're told to notice it, right? So I'm going to speak of women as initiators, right? Even though that's like against gender stereotypes, whatever. All right, I think men are mostly like, sidewalk, school building. Right, so we don't always notice things until they're brought to our attention. So I think some women do different things to cultivate interest. Some flirt or fawn, others freeze. Okay, so they'll kind of like make themselves more available, they'll make themselves more known, they'll make their interest known in subtle but undeniably obvious ways, right? Or if they think that the man in whom they would like to cultivate interest is not showing sufficient interest, then they will just be difficult, right? Because they're like, wait a second, she's being mean to me. I need to try harder, So that way the man kind of overcorrects by being overly solicitous for her. Now, both of these, women, are kind of forms of manipulation, all right? They're not, I mean, they're just like normal, right? So we don't have to be like, oh my gosh, I flirted again. Back to confession, you know? It's totally normal, but I don't think that we should rely overly much on manipulative extremes, okay? I think there's something to be said for like a kind of courtesy. Now, mind you, a lot of norms of courtesy or norms of like politesse, they are non-reciprocal, right? So like men can hold like doors for women, but women can't hold doors for men. And like men can pay for women, but women can't, you know, like there are a lot of things that seem non-reciprocal. And so I think that put women in a kind of strange position vis-a-vis men because they're like, how do I show my gratitude? How do I show reciprocity? How do I show the things that I want to show? And it's not always easy to divine. But courtesy does provide a kind of it provides the healthy contours for navigating relationships in a way where you can show genuine interest and delight and enjoyment of the other person's company without manipulating. Okay. Now, prudence. Okay. So in friendships between men and women, I think it's requisite that one be prudent. Okay, so there are certain things for which one need account. So I think time, place, exclusivity, and intimacy are the types of things of which you need to be conscious. Men and women are always falling in love with each other. All right? And if you're like, let's just see how this goes, you're going to almost always end up dating. Okay? So there is a natural gravitation. Remember we said biological dimension with spiritual resonance, different forms of communication, chances of misunderstanding, but like a kind of gravity. And so if you just let it go as it goes, you will observe this cycle throughout your entire life. It goes like this. Infatuation, dating, breakup, infatuation, dating, breakup, infatuation. Right, so it will never stop, right? Unless you're hanging out with a focus mission and they're like, you should maybe consider a dating fast. And then you're like, what? So, things about which you need to be conscious. Okay, time, place, exclusivity, and intimacy. If you ever with a member of the opposite sex late, that person will take it as interest. It won't register cognitively as interest, but it will register in their body as interest. Place. If you are at the type of place where people go on dates, that will register in the member of the opposite sex as interest. Not necessarily cognitively, but in their body it will register as interest. Okay? If you are ever alone together, that will always and everywhere register as interest. You're like, oh, we're just study buddies, you know. We have very similar learning styles. I'm like 63% kinesthetic and like 37% auditory. And they're just the perfect complement, like very visual. It's like, no, you're lying to yourself. You're on a date, okay? You just have textbooks with you by accident. So exclusivity and then intimacy. When you share things with certain people that you don't share with other people, that communicates interest, all right? Doesn't necessarily register cognitively as interest, but it is interest. And here's the thing. You are always going to take greater delight in sharing something with a member of the opposite sex than you will with sharing with somebody of the same sex, okay? It's like always more delightful for reasons that we find it difficult to explain, but which the whole like evolutionary biological undercurrent of our existence conveys to the next generation, okay? So, time, place, exclusivity, intimacy. Other factors that you might consider. Alcohol. Right? Like, I thought I was very clear. If there is alcohol present, you were not very clear. Okay? Even if it's just in the room. All right? You might, I wasn't partaking. I'm on Exodus 90. You know? If there is alcohol present, you were communicating interest. Okay? So, group hangouts at places mutually agreed upon that are disarming, and like kind of otherwise hospitable and welcoming, good things. Last thoughts. I think that in your relationships, it can sometimes be helpful to think about the relationship when projected into the future. So think of yourself as married, not necessarily to this person, and then think about how your relationship with this person might develop to fit into the context of your married life. Like, can you introduce this person to your spouse? Would your spouse be friends with this person? How would you hang out with this person going forward? And if you're mildly embarrassed about the prospect, because there's interest, right? And that's fine. There's all kinds of interest in all kinds of corners. That's totally fine. But if we're not honest with it, we will continue to date people whom we might not be intended to date, okay? So I think also, in how you narrate your own kind of dating history, you have to be brutally honest with yourself. If you've had a series of 4 or 5 relationships, all of which have been under 8 weeks, you're not doing it especially well. It's like, oh, but I've experienced it as so freeing. I formerly had difficulty with anxiety and like OCD, and I hypermanage relationships, and they cause me great stress. But I've been experiencing these things as a like really delightful, offhanded, and kind of whimsical thing. So that shows progress, does it not? Well, here's the thing. When you start dating somebody, there's interest. When you break up, there's still interest. And getting over interest is often morally devastating, right? Psychologically hard. Spiritually, sometimes a stumbling block. Now, can that be part of the story of your redemption? Absolutely, for sure. But I don't think you should get into a habit of constantly dating in such a way that other people have to pick up the pieces of their own lives in your wake, okay? So, when we tell ourselves our own story of our own dating history, we need to be able to acknowledge failures, okay? I ended up dating somebody because I felt like I had to by gravitational pull. But I wouldn't have chosen that at the outset. But I just couldn't help myself from responding to all texts immediately. I'm not saying you ghost people, but I'm saying that you do wait till the morning. I'm just saying that. Because if it's like 11 p.m., it's like I had this random thought which was really inconsequential, but it was really a way by which to like kind of involve you in a 1-hour text conversation. That's not what he would write, but something like that, you know? And you're just like, cool. You know what that guy's going to do? He's going to cool off. Okay? But if you respond, he is not going to cool off. So, project into the future. Think about it in terms of your married life, your consecrated life, etc. Final thought. We were not made to be alone. Regardless of state, setting, or circumstance, we were made to be together in friendship. Some friendships assume a further dimension in marriage. Others, most in the ordinary course, do not. There are distinct aspects of the glory of God that only you or I can make known, and it is part of the dignity of friends to elicit that revelation. And I believe that the spontaneous inclination to the heart of members of the opposite sex is part of that story. Without friendships of this sort, there would be certain aspects of your excellence, certain aspects of your vocation that would never be made known. And that would be a tragedy and a failure in humanity. Because we are made to go to God together in a web of communion, and each fate hangs on that of the other. Thank you. There we go. We got time for like 15 minutes of questions, I think? Or however many you have. Yes.
Curious, what is your opinion on the idea of a soulmate in the way that one's vocation is, you can pick any way, but there's one that God really wills you to take. But what do you think the idea of within the vocation of marriage that there's one person out there, or maybe dozens or thousands?
Excellent question. I don't think you have a soulmate. Right? I don't think you have a soulmate. I think God knows who you will marry. Right? So God is eternal. He has whole and simultaneous embrace of endless life. All being, exhausted in his nature, is present to him, right? So nothing surprises God, and also God conjoins his will to those things so that they are. But he does not divulge that to us. And God wills that free things happen freely. So it means that your choice for or against your vocation, or your choice in whatever so way it takes shape, is actually free. And if it's actually free, then it transpires through your agency. And I think there are like between 10 and 12 women at George Mason right now with whom you could be happily married in 4 years, okay? Why do I think that? Well, because I think on the one hand it matters, and on the other hand it just doesn't matter, okay? So like, what's the point of what's the point of marriage? What is the point of marriage? Okay. So I think that there is only one vocation. Yes, I was hoping for a controversial claim. Right, so I think there's only one vocation, and I think that vocation is heaven. So all of us are called to the loving vision of God in heaven, which admits of no loss or diminishment. And God affords us certain means to attain to that end. So he gives us the Lord Jesus Christ, the incarnate Word. He gives us the church, right? He gives us the sacraments. He gives us all kinds of actual graces and sacramentals and sweet stuff. One of the things that he gives us is states of life. We call those things states of life because they have a kind of participation or share in the one vocation. We call them vocation because they have a kind of participation or share in the one vocation. So what is that one vocation? It's covenant love, right? We are each wed immediately to God. And in those states of life, we have a foretaste of covenant love, whether in the vows of marriage, the vows of consecrated life, or the ordination of the priesthood. So what these things are means, right? They are means. They are ways to heaven. But in the garden, it was intended that all be married, right? That grace be communicated to the next generation through marriage. So consecrated life, priesthood, they're a product of the fall, as it were, accidentally. So everyone was intended to get married. So this was the ordinary course. But in heaven, you will neither be married nor given in marriage, because you will be wed directly to God. Marriage is a sign of God's love, right? But you don't need signs in heaven because you've just got the realities. You swim in the realities. You breathe the realities. They are your very atmosphere. They are your life breath, okay? So it does not matter too terribly much how you get to heaven, provided that you get there. Leon Bloy says, the only tragedy in life is not to have become a saint. And if we get in the mindset that there's a soulmate, then we immediately begin to think that you can miss that soulmate. And then we place an incredible amount of pressure on ourselves thinking that I'm going to miss my soulmate. Because even if I'm doing my best to be virtuous, he might be in his parents' basement at this very moment, playing whatever people play. What do people play? Fortnite, yes. So God's plan is too big and too embracing to be defeated by one slovenly, immature, maladjusted male, okay? Sorry. Right, because God is too generous. That's what I will say.
Hey, Father, this may be a little bit of a loaded question, and I don't know if you have an opinion on it, but so your choice to answer it. But
All right.
When did feminism go wrong?
The Jets are gonna have their way. All right. Weird West Side Story reference. Whoa. So I don't actually know much about feminism. This is like kind of what I know about it. So first wave, second wave, third wave. Oftentimes, okay. So I think feminism goes wrong when the purpose of being a woman, or like the excellence of being a woman, is just the same as the excellence of being a man. Right? I think that feminism can be done poorly if the emphasis on complementarity ends up in such a way making it sound that women are for making children. Okay? So like you encounter this in some quarters, like the whole like barefoot and pregnant in the kitchen type thing, which I think is disrespectful and unhelpful. So what is it? What should it be? Well, I read that quote from Edith Stein because I think she has a lot of beautiful things to say about it. There's it's a collection of her essays called Woman, published by ICS, and she has the most interesting things to say about the quote-unquote feminine genius of anyone I've read. I've just read that, John Paul II's Mulieris Dignitatem, and then some random things by Alice von Hildebrand. But I think that she has like a kind of sensitivity to a peculiar excellence proper to man and woman. And then she has a sensitivity to the fact that men and women are better suited to certain vocations, as it were, and that embraces both like operational and essential. So like the doing of things and the being of things, right? And that it's good that be recognized, embraced, and lived in and out of. But that also, she says in that same collection of essays, that women would do well, basically, to be in the workplace with men, to perform a lot of tasks that are typically done by men, because of like this idea, like a woman is sensitive to the heart, a woman is sensitive to details and things like that. So I think that feminism goes wrong when it fails to acknowledge difference, when it focuses mostly in terms of advancement, like kind of like glass ceiling arguments and things like that.
Like economic.
Yeah. Economic considerations, and basically whenever it's operating out of a like a veiled Marxist critique, so like whenever you hear like, oh, we're in some kind of bad arrangement with an overclass, and we need to overthrow them so that we can usher in some apocalyptic third age in which everyone will have equal access to the goods of the land and the means of production. It's like
they don't use that language anymore.
No,
It's the same idea.
Yeah. So those are my basic thoughts, without actually knowing much about feminism.
So kind of in reference to the interplay between biological dimension and spiritual dimension, maybe this will be controversial, we'll see. So if women are more physiologically and naturally ordered towards the place and position of being the bride, how does this interplay with their position as bride of Christ? And with that difference, how does man in his relationship and friendship with Christ differ on this account?
That's an excellent question. So, did everyone hear it? Okay. So I'm married to Jesus Christ, which is a weird thing to say. it causes people some discomfort. And priests, will sometimes try to explain it in different terms, which is fine. I'm not saying this is a bad end. They'll say they're married to the church. I'm not married to the church. I'm kind of married to the church in as much as a priest by his ordination is conformed to Christ, who himself is the bridegroom vis-a-vis the church. But the nature of my consecrated, kind of spousal intimacy is Christ-facing, which is weird, right? So I think that this whole idea, so woman is daughter, bride, and mother, and that you see that expressed in different ways in the married state and in the consecrated state, but both conduce to a similar revelation. And I think the similar revelation is that God is enough. So we talk about religious life as an eschatological sign. The word eschatological is taken from the Greek word eschaton, which means the end, which is to say that religious life is supposed to be a sign of the end. It's supposed to be a sign of heaven, of the end times. And why is that? Well, because a religious testifies by virtue of his or her consecration that God is enough, right? A lot of people in this world think that if they do not have immediate access to sexual intercourse, that they will literally explode, that they will live a wildly, underwhelmingly dissatisfactory life. But what a religious testifies to is the fact that God is enough, right? So we said in heaven we will neither be married nor given in marriage because we each belong wholly and entirely to the Lord. So in heaven, faith passes away because there's no need for faith when you have vision. Hope passes away. There's no need for hope when you have possession. The sacraments pass away because there's no need for signs when you have realities. And effectively, what we testify to by our life with poverty, chastity, and obedience is that these things can be set aside now so as to begin the life of heaven presently, so that by living in its forecourts, one is better disposed to enter into the very thing itself. And so I think that women are especially well disposed to make this known. You often hear it said that women are more naturally religious than men. So I'm unsettled by this. There are almost twice as many women religious as there are men religious. Why is that? Right? Why is that? I have no way by which to explain that well. The closest thing I've come to an answer was in a conversation with a woman where a woman was saying to me that the religious instinct is not too terribly far from fear. It's closely akin to fear, and the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. And I, for instance, I live in Washington, D.C. I toddle on down to the metro without thinking 2 seconds about it, whereas a woman can't really do that in our neighborhood. So the Brookland CUA is the highest concentration of crime on the whole metro system. It's a lot of petty crime, but still. A woman can't do that, right? So I think women are more accustomed to fear on a daily basis than are men. And as a result of which, I think that women are more accustomed to look for security, protection, provision, all the things that we associate with God. And so I think that the relationship with God for a woman comes more naturally, and as a result of which the spousal dimension arises kind of organically from that fact. So I think that women, not only by virtue of the fact that Christ took to himself a male human nature, and so the spousal logic of their consecration is very clear, I think that women are just kind of better disposed to reveal God's fatherhood. Because I think that most men are kind of like brats until such time as they have their first kid. And they're just yeah! I have to grow up. Soon. Maybe later, Maybe today. Whereas I think women are just better disposed to the recognition of their need for God. And that's not to say that women are, it's not to peddle and crass stereotypes. I know this doesn't apply universally. And I don't mean to offend sensibilities. I mean that genuinely. After I just brashly said a bunch of random stuff for 50 minutes. But I do value your heart, so.
So I have a younger brother, and he's in middle school right now. Actually, he's a freshman in high school. And I just really love him, and I know that he's becoming a man, but also he's interested in girls. When is it too young to start dating?
I think it depends. When is it old enough? Yeah. 26 is the new 18. So I wish, if you come from a good community, a well-adjusted family, if you were loved, if your parents are still married, if they love each other, if they raised you in the faith, right? If you're secure in your attachment, then I think you're just better disposed to love well and to love maturely. But if you don't have that, I don't think you are. But then, kind of paradoxically, it's more likely that you will date because you're looking for love in a way that's not being supplied at home. That's not to psychologize everyone's problems. Everyone's story is different. It is possible to heal. But like my novitiate class, for instance, we were 21 when we entered, okay? Every man, to a man, both parents, still alive, Catholic, married to each other, love their kids. That's not insignificant. It's just like when a lot of wounds are dealt in your childhood, it's just life becomes very sad. And it becomes very difficult. And you can do the work, and God's healing grace can be operative in your life in such a way as to make you, like capable of the type of happiness which he promises. But it's just hard. So I'd say, yeah, it's like fine to date in high school if you're emotionally mature. If you're not, you wouldn't, but you're going to. So nobody needs Father Gregory's rules for life because they don't matter. Yeah, but if he meets a girl at church, starts dating, I'll be like, boom, awesome. They're going to get into some like wild hand-holding adventures. Yeah, my goal for like high school boys is that they get out alive. Right? So I encourage all high school boys to graduate early because I don't think there's much to be gained in high school unless you're going to Seton, to preserve chastity. So like you should have covenant eyes on all devices in your home, and like they should not be allowed to go to the houses of kids who don't have covenant eyes on all their devices. Like parents, I don't think that parents can be too helicoptery when it comes to that type of stuff, because once it's in the system, it gets super hard to heal. And I think they should read Lives of Saints, because I think that young men are especially inspired by magnanimous examples. So like I think when a 15-year-old boy reads a story about Saint Jean de Brébeuf, who comported himself so admirably, so nobly, so courageously, that the Indian tribe that overran his settlement, his enemies, ate his heart to partake of his courage. It's like, yeah. My goal for high school boys is get out alive, preserve chastity, and read saints. Yeah. Because they're not going to pray. I wish they would. You're lucky if you get 10 minutes out of a high school boy. Yep.
So, I mean, women naturally have more empathy for people than men do. How do we as men sort of combat some of the stuff we see in society with just general lack of empathy, like especially among men?
Yeah. So I said that men are typically more task-oriented and women more relation-oriented, and I think that's part of what informs the phenomenon that you observe. I think that men, as a result of which, are often tempted by the sin of ambition, and I think that ambition often involves crafting plans that do not take account of the heart. So I think that for men, we need to be constantly recollected in the fact that the only thing really that matters in your life are the people, right? That's the only thing that matters. I think a lot of times we think that the tasks matter. We get them all written out on our checklist, and as a result of which we feel validated to the extent that a sufficient number have been crossed off. But the thing with people that's at once beautiful and maddening is that they cannot be crossed off checklists. So like for instance, last night, what was I doing? I have no recollection. What was I doing? Oh, I was reading Dostoevsky's novel Demons, which is sweet. And I got a text message from Father Bonaventure at like 8:02 p.m. And it said, my sister-in-law, like trouble pregnancy, she might miscarry, pray. And so I texted back like praying. So I was down the street. But then I got back home, we prayed compline. It's 9:15. I can go to bed because I've been dragging my corpse around for like so many days on end that I cannot, whatever. I'm just like, I'm a tired person. And so I could have done that and like looked out for myself and like thought about the next day's tasks. But instead, I just went up to his room and I sat in his chair and like left the light on until such time as he came out of the chapel, he prayed like an extra rosary, and then we chatted for a while. And today, I feel tired. Like when I was driving here, it was like that combo factor where you've got like light coming off the road, and then it's like just at the right angle that the sun shield doesn't actually do anything about it, and then you're like feeling caffeine debt and getting hypnotized. You're like, when will the car wreck happen? So like I'm a tired puppy, right? But I don't regret it, right? Because I think previously I would, this is like a strange story because I'm the hero. Like previously I would have just gotten to sleep, because we can be principled to a fault at times. But I think that it's always about the people. It's always about the people. So, yes, what do I think that men can do to kind of empathize their lives and create a genuinely human culture? I think it involves being with people. And if you find your plans lie in the direction that have you apart from people, then those plans stand in need of revision. So yeah, that's a thought.
Thank you.
Yeah. Do we have time for another question? Okay. One more.
So, do you think it's possible to maintain a relationship with a person of the opposite sex who you had an intimate relationship with?
Yes, but I think that it's difficult, and I think that it requires a necessary time of separation in order to disambiguate relationship and feelings. So, you know, like, or just say like a DTR, for instance. The person is growing interest in you, you do not reciprocate the interest, you sense it, you say we should talk about this, you define the relationship, and you say, I don't think that we should talk or text for 5 months. And she'll be like, wow, that's like kind of severe and devastating. And you're like, I know. But I think that we just need to like disentangle a little bit, get some good space, and then reestablish boundaries, because otherwise it'll be a constant temptation, and like we'll feel like we're hurting each other by communicating, and you never want to communicate that, right? Because like you'll feel like you're capitulating when you respond, and she'll feel like she's tempting when she initiates. So I think it's just better. It's merciful. It's kind. It's good. It's generous. It's the type of thing that one need do if you do value the relationship. There are some relationships that will never come back, right? They just won't. That's part of life, and it's sad. But there are some, I think, that can be rehabilitated. And I should say, just like as a general application point, like I said, I think it's possible to have friendships between men and women, but I think that you just need to be conscious of this dimension, and you need to plan for it prudently. And if you're uncomfortable in a situation, then you can acknowledge that to the other party without it becoming weird. It's just like, hey, this is the type of thing that people do when they're dating, so let's just do something else. It's like, cool, short convo, disambiguated, you're ready to rock, okay? It's just like simple. It's super simple. It needn't be overly hard. Yeah. Yeah.